There's a split second when someone calls you out, a jab, a look, a question wrapped in judgment. It doesn't matter if it's public or private. Your chest tightens, your throat builds pressure. Your mind races for the perfect comeback that will make them regret ever questioning you. But here's the truth. If you speak first, you've already lost, because the moment you defend yourself, you hand over the frame. You tell them they matter more than your silence. You beg them to believe what you say. Instead of making them question what they just felt, you don't want clarity, you want control, but you keep chasing the wrong thing. And that's how they keep you small. They bait you, with tone, with doubt, with whispers that pierce deeper than screams. And what do most people do? They explain, they justify, they try to sound reasonable, but the ones who rise, they stare. They breathe, they let the silence do what words never could. You're not here to be liked. You're not here to be understood. You're here to remember who the hell you are, without ever raising your voice. Let's begin. They taught you to defend yourself from the moment you were young, at school, at home, even with friends. If someone accused you, questioned you, mocked you, what did they say? Speak up, explain, make them see the real you. But no one told you the truth, that defending yourself is a trap, because when you defend, you accept the frame they handed you. You step inside the courtroom they built, and without realizing it, you declare something loud and clear. I need your approval, and just like that, the power shifts. You see, people don't accuse you to understand you. They accuse you to see how much it hurts. They want to feel you squirm. They want you to try and make it right, because that's when they know they've won. That's when they know they got under your skin, and still you defend. You rush to say, that's not true. You type the paragraph. You send the voice note. You look them in the eyes and beg them to see your side, but you never noticed. They stopped listening the second you started explaining, because defense is noise, and noise is weakness. You don't calm them, you feed them. You give them a performance they can replay, twist, laugh at, share, and maybe you don't hear the applause, but trust me, they're clapping, because they made you dance. It feels noble to clarify yourself, fair, reasonable. You think, I just want them to know the truth, but if you have to explain your truth to be believed, is it still yours? The powerful don't beg to be understood. They make others afraid to misunderstand. You don't defend power, you project it. And here's what they'll never teach you, that every time you explain yourself, you shrink just a little. Not because you're wrong, but because your energy now belongs to someone else's doubt. They throw the match, you rush to put out the fire. But in doing so, you light yourself up for them. Now imagine this, they throw the match. And you don't move, not a word, not a blink. You just stay still. Suddenly, they're not so sure anymore. Did they go too far? Did they say something stupid? Why aren't you reacting? Their eyes dart, their voice wavers, and now, the courtroom they built collapses. Because it turns out, you were never on trial, they were, and all it took was your silence. Every time you open your mouth to justify yourself, you kneel, not with your body, with your posture. Your eyes, your energy, because the moment you respond to a jab, no matter how polished, how calm, you've already accepted one devastating condition. That they have the right to question you, and once you've accepted that, they own the frame. They set the rules, you play inside them. You're not guiding the story anymore, you're reacting to theirs. Most people don't see this. They think silence means surrender, that if you don't speak, you lose your chance to clear the air. But the opposite is true. When you speak too soon, you validate the room's suspicion, even if what you say is flawless. Even if you're completely innocent, you still look like you're trying to escape the blow. But the ones who win, they don't play defense, they hold the silence, they let the noise echo, and that silence, it does something brutal. It exposes the attacker. I once worked with a woman named Olivia, sharp, brilliant, head of creative at a major firm in Chicago. One day in a company-wide Zoom, someone made a sly remark. A male exec, younger than her, dropped it mid-presentation. Oh well, you know Olivia, always intense. You should see her Slack messages at 2 a.m. Laughter followed. Forced uncomfortable, the room turned to her. Everyone waited. She could have explained, clarified. I'm just passionate. I work hard. But she didn't. She stared at the camera. No words, just presence. 3 seconds passed, then 5. She smiled, soft, controlled. Then she returned to her slides like nothing happened. That moment, it flipped the power. People started whispering. Not about her, about him. Why'd he say that? Was he threatened? Was it jealousy? And just like that, the frame shifted. Because Olivia didn't step into the courtroom, she made them question why one even existed. The man who framed her lost credibility, not because she fought back, but because she didn't flinch. That's the paradox. You don't prove strength by proving a point. You prove it by refusing to need one. Silence isn't absence, it's presence. Sharpened, directed, deadly, and the moment you stop trying to be seen as a reasonable, you start being seen as untouchable. Silence isn't just a pause, it's a mirror. When someone throws an accusation, what they expect is noise, reaction, emotion. They expect you to flinch, explain, maybe even beg, but when you give them nothing, they're forced to hear themselves fully, and what they hear, it's not as sharp as they thought. It's not as justified. It starts to sound insecure. Because silence reflects everything back, not with judgment, not with aggression, just stillness. And in that stillness, something shifts. They start questioning their tone, their timing, their reason, not because you challenged them, but because they challenged themselves and heard the echo. Think of it like this: when you reply too quickly, you interrupt their process. You take their emotion and try to dissolve it. But when you wait, you let the tension sit. You let the discomfort grow, and suddenly, it's not your discomfort, it's theirs. I've seen it happen hundreds of times. One moment, someone's puffed up, certain they've called you out. In next moment, they're shrinking in real time. They look around the room, they scan for backup, they try to soften what they just said. Because now they feel alone in their attack. They expected a clash, a duel. Instead, they're performing in front of an audience that isn't applauding. And here's the power play. You didn't do anything. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't fire back. You just stayed still. That's what silence really is. A pressure chamber, not on you, on them. And most people can't breathe in it, so they fumble. They over-explain, they get defensive about their own words, and all you did was hold the mirror up. They handed you a weapon, hoping you'd swing. Instead, you made them see their own reflection, and that's far more devastating, far more lasting. Because it doesn't just shift the conversation, it shifts who's in control of the entire room. Let them speak. Let the words float. Let the judgment hang in the air like smoke in a sealed room. You don't need to clear it. You don't need to fan it away, because sometimes the most powerful move is letting the accusation echo. Not in defense, not in shame, but in stillness, because the longer it echoes, the more it weakens. Most people rush to respond because they think the accusation will spread, that silence equals guilt. That if they don't shut it down now, it will grow. But here's what actually happens. When you say nothing, truly nothing, the words begin to lose their weight. They bounce around, they get repeated. They sound less sharp, less certain, more emotional, more about the accuser than about you. And the crowd, the room, they start to wonder. Why are they still talking about it? Why are they explaining so much? Why hasn't he said anything back? That's when the shift happens, because power doesn't move fast, it lingers, and silence lets their attack overstay its welcome. I remember a man named Marcus, CEO of a rising tech firm in Austin, calm, unshakable, until one day, a junior manager accused him publicly of being cold, disconnected, and manipulative. It was in a company forum. Hundreds of eyes saw it. Everyone waited for his reply. He didn't post a single word, not that day, not that week, not even that quarter. 3 months passed, the accuser posted again, but now the tone had changed. It was less fiery, less certain, almost apologetic. And Marcus, He didn't reply to that either, but something fascinating happened. The team stopped talking about the accusation. Not because it was disproven, but because it had nowhere to go. It had no traction, no opposition, just silence. And silence turned that bold accusation into a whisper. People began respecting Marcus more, not because he proved anything, but because he didn't flinch. He didn't fight for innocence. He let the noise collapse on itself. Because noise without resistance becomes static, and no one listens to static for long, so let them throw the words. Let them twist the tone. Let them repeat it again and again, and while they burn energy trying to make it stick. You conserve yours, you become colder, clearer, heavier, because the moment you refuse to play the game, the crowd stops watching the players and starts questioning the rules. There's a tactic colder than silence: inversion, not defending. Not denying, but flipping the frame so cleanly it makes them trip over their own accusation. Someone calls you manipulative. You look at them with calm detachment and say, only people who can't be influenced say that. You didn't argue. You didn't even raise your tone. You just took their dagger and made them hold the handle. Because most accusations are not about truth, they are about projection. People say you're selfish when they feel left out. They say you're arrogant when they feel small. They say you're fake when they're no longer needed in your story. And if you meet those accusations with defense, you accept their emotion as your problem. But if you invert it, you show them what they were never ready to see, that their attack came from a bruise. And now they feel exposed. They look emotional, unstable, too invested in proving something, while you look untouched. That's what inversion does. It reframes the scene without lifting a finger. Someone says, you always need to be right. You reply, or maybe I'm just not afraid to speak when I am. They call you toxic. Funny how that word always shows up after I stop being available. Now they're scrambling. They thought you'd flinch. They thought you'd rush to be liked again. Instead, you placed the weight back on them. And the room feels it. Because inversion doesn't just reverse the accusation, it exposes the motive. They came to label you. You showed them their own reflection, and that reflection stings. Because when you respond without defending, you don't look guilty, you look dangerous. You don't look emotional, you look precise, and most of all, you don't look like someone they want to confront again, because next time they try to throw words, they'll remember how badly they tripped over their own. Public silence, private impact, that's the formula. Because when something explodes around you, whether it's a rumor, a call-out, a whisper dressed as concern, people don't just watch what was said, they watch what you do next. And most people, they react, they post, they comment. They text friends, trying to clear things up, but the ones who understand power, they go quiet. Not because they're weak, not because they're afraid, but because they know something the others don't. That silence makes people lean in. It builds pressure, suspicion, curiosity. The accuser says their piece, but when you don't reply, the crowd starts looking sideways. Oh, why didn't she respond? Is there more to this? Why do they seem so calm? And that calm, it's not just a mood. It's a weapon, because the public is not loyal to noise, they're loyal to confidence, and confidence, when it's real, doesn't flinch at chaos, it absorbs it, it outlasts it. That's why silence, strategic silence, often builds more trust than any well-worded reply ever could, because people aren't as logical as they claim, they don't tally facts, they feel certainty. And when you move with restraint, when you don't bite back, when your energy doesn't shift, they feel that certainty. They say, maybe he's not even worried, maybe she knows something we don't, and suddenly the story turns. Not because you spoke, but because you didn't. You see, public perception doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who feels most anchored in the storm, and silence, when paired with posture, becomes a storm in itself. It doesn't shout, it surrounds. You become the stillness that rattles the crowd, and without speaking, you shift every eye from the words being said to the weight you carry just by staying still. There's a silence louder than any reply. It's not just stillness, it's absence, not the kind where you sulk or hide, but the kind where you vanish completely. Without a trace, without a word, no reaction, no blocking, no clarifying post, you just disappear. And in that emptiness, something begins to break, but it's not you, it's them, because the average person survives on emotional feedback. Even in conflict, they need proof you were hit, they need to see their words land. That's what fuels them. Take that away, they crumble, they check their phone, they refresh the app, they send another message. They post something louder, sharper, more desperate, and the silence, it just sits there, like a mirror no one asked for. Now they're spiraling. They talk to others, they start retelling the story, not because it's true, but because they're begging for response. And with every repetition, they sound less certain, more emotional, more unstable. Meanwhile, you're still gone, no energy spent. No attention given, you let your absence haunt them. I saw this happen to Rachel. She was an influencer in the health space, strong voice, huge following. Then came the accusations, subtweets, videos, a whole thread trying to expose her. Everyone waited for her reply. She posted nothing. For 6 months, people speculated, assumed she was broken. Done until one day she came back, clean, calm, and more followed than ever. She dropped one video. Quiet, no names, no drama. Just her doing what she does best, and the storm, it was gone. The attackers looked obsessed. Her silence had aged their noise. She didn't win by fighting, she won by vanishing. That's the move, because when you remove your energy from the fire, the flame doesn't grow, it dies. Disappearance isn't weakness, it's control, and not everyone deserves access to your presence, especially not when they use it to try and build their own. So disappear, not to escape, but to make them sit with the sound of their own desperation. They want you to defend, because defense means you care. And caring, publicly, emotionally, desperately, is the easiest way to make you look small. But there's another way, not just silence, not just detachment. Reversal. When they say you're arrogant, you say, strange how confidence makes some people so uncomfortable. When they say you're fake, you reply, that's what people always say when I stop giving them what they want. When they call you controlling, you offer, only those who can't lead themselves feel that way. These aren't defenses, they're redirects. They don't aim to soothe the critic, they aim to expose the weakness behind the attack. Because most accusations are not observations, they're projections. People want you to validate their discomfort, they want you to make their feelings feel righteous, but you don't owe them that. You don't owe comfort to people trying to tear you down, and when you reverse the accusation, cleanly, simply, without emotion, you make them explain themselves. Now they're backpedaling, now they're clarifying. Now they're trying to prove they weren't being petty or reactive, but it's too late. The room has already felt the flip. You didn't just avoid the jab, you made them look insecure for even throwing it. That's not just strength, that's strategy. Because the most Machiavellian move isn't resistance, it's redirection. You take their force and guide it back toward them, effortlessly, quietly, precisely, and in doing so, you never have to defend your image. You let their reaction redefine theirs. You don't need to be seen as good, you need to be felt as strong, not clean, not agreeable, not well-liked, just undeniable. That's the difference between reputation and presence. A good reputation is delicate, it requires maintenance, it bends to opinion, it begs for fairness. But a strong reputation, it walks into a room and shifts the air, because when you no longer explain yourself, people stop looking for your approval. They start fearing your disapproval, they start respecting your silence, they start wondering what you know that they don't, and that's the highest level of power, not noise, not dominance, but aura, an energy that says, I don't argue. I don't chase, I don't flinch. You don't need to post a response, you don't need to answer the call, you don't need to play the game. You've outgrown the court, because silence, held with certainty, becomes myth. People fill in the blanks with power, they assume you're untouchable, they assume you could ruin someone. but choose not to, and that assumption, it's more dangerous than any accusation they could ever throw. So now, you don't react, you define. You define your tone, your posture, your energy. You define what deserves your words, and what doesn't. Because when you become the one who never explains, you become the one they stop testing, the one they stop provoking, the one they speak of carefully, the one whose absence weighs more than most people's presence. That's not cold, that's command, and command doesn't argue. It just stands unshaken, unapologetic, unmoved. That's when you stop playing for approval and start living as the one they cannot touch.